All right, please welcome Senator Blake Tillery.
You're gonna put me here in the high chair after those words that I had to look up half of them sitting in the audience right there. I tell you, scare me a little bit here, Doc.
Hey, years ago I was invited to be a part of a group of young men who are being trained for leadership in the conservative movement. The Heritage Foundation was doing this. And invited to speak into our lives was a man named Roger Ailes, who would later found Fox News. But he was famous then for having been communications director for Ronald Reagan. And I'll never forget, he said, look, one of your goals in life is to be put in as few awkward situations as possible.
I have failed tonight, huh?
Well, here we are. We're in a high chair, but we're going to make the best of it. Tell me how it is that you became a state senator.
Great question. I think there's probably a lot of people who I went to high school with asking that same question. How the heck did this guy get to be a state senator?
Well, just imagine the people who were in high school with Donald Trump.
Well, they saw it more with Trump. I'm not going to follow you there. I do know my base here. I'm not going to follow you there, Doc. Well, I'm Blake Tillery. I grew up in Vidalia, Georgia, and had an awesome upbringing. My family I had a two-parent home, which is less and less common nowadays. My parents, we had enough money. My dad didn't finish college. We had enough money where my mom could stay home with me, even though she was highly well educated. She was an aerospace engineer, and three brothers. So they wanted nothing to do with politics at all. In fact, I got interested in it because I played baseball, tore my shoulder up, and was just watching presidential speeches sitting at the house. I was like, man, this is kind of interesting. It sounds like you can make a difference. And I had a family who was really close to me, the Moon family, who would take me to Christian Coalition and other different meetings across the state back when it was not a really large group. The 700 Club, Pat Robertson on the news all the time. My mom would watch that every morning. And so that stuff started shaping kind of how I viewed the world and where I thought that maybe I could make a difference one day. So carry that forward a few years. I helped some folks get elected. And then they did things that were a little bit different than I thought they would do when they were in office. And it usually revolved around things like policy, taxes, stuff like that. So I ran against them. I got elected to the county commission. I was 28. And after that, the guy who was the senator in my seat, a guy named Tommy Williams, a really strong Christian business leader who many of you may know, he decided to step down. He called me the day before, said, I'm stepping down tomorrow. Do you want to run for, are you going to announce you're going to run? And I was getting married in 10 weeks. I said, Mr. Tommy, no, sir, I'm going to run for re-election to the county commission. He's like, okay, well, you want to think about it? I said, sure. And he called me back a few hours later and said, have you thought about it? I said, well, yeah. He said, well, did you talk to anybody? I said, well, you told me not to tell anybody. And he's like, well, did you tell your fiance? He's like, again, you told me not to tell anybody. And he said, well, where's she from? I said, she's from Jessup. And in that Senate district, the two biggest cities were Vidalia, my hometown, and Jessup, her hometown. So Tommy, being the great spiritual leader he was, goes, well, this is divine. I said, Miss Tommy, I think that me and her hopefully are together a lot longer than I'm in the Senate. But it ended up being such an awesome opportunity. I have the pleasure now of representing 200,000 people. I went into the Senate in 2017, as I'm sure you'll say. And as you know, you sit in the Senate a long time before you start moving up in committees. Senator Harbin out there, Senator Setzler. But the tenure I've had, I do not deserve it. I got to chair appropriations in 3 years. If you've been down to the Capitol, that's kind of fast. And now for 6 years, I've been able to help lead our state as, while Senator Dolezal said, we've grown our budget by about $10 billion. But you realize we're still spending at 2018 levels when you take into account inflation, which is killing families, and growth of our state. So we've tried to keep the reins in at the same time that we've had to take the steps we needed to make sure we were funding the infrastructure projects that really mattered.
So, you probably, when you were playing baseball as a boy, never really expected that you'd be chairing an appropriations committee.
I thought that before I thought I'd be sitting on the stage with the great Al Mohler.
My heavens. But what exactly did you appropriate?
In the budget, the Appropriations Committee, we spend your state budget. So you contribute roughly $37 billion in state funds a year. We match that with roughly $30 billion of federal funding, mostly in Medicaid, some in education. And then that's your state budget that goes back to fund your roads, bridges, at school. 53% of our budget in this state goes to education. 23% goes to Medicaid. We've been such strong fiscal conservative and fiscal stewards that when we walk in, 77% is usually already out the door. That's going to be our focus for the next few years, the next decade, is how do you dive into those base budgets? You know, that's really the fight in Washington. You hear them talk about entitlement spending. Well, in our state, the entitlement spending is education and healthcare. And we're going to have to dive into those things.
Why does this matter? I mean, what does this have to do with the prosperity of Georgia? Draw a line between the decisions made in your committee and what happens financially in the life of a Georgia family.
A couple of things. We're not, obviously the trajectory of our speech isn't quite as philosophical and theoretical or theological as Greg's, but remember, the state, we create nothing. We don't make widgets, iPhones, anything. We use the force of law, the power of law, to take money out of your pocket and put it into the government's pocket. And that's the least efficient way to spend things. Other people spending money back on you. That's the least efficient way to do it. So that's where it hits folks immediately. If you want to talk about just specifics, we'll dive in for instance into the transgender bills. We've talked about those. I've heard you talking as we've been sitting in the audience with Megan, and then obviously your conversations with Greg. In Georgia, thanks to Senator Setzler in the back, Senator Harbin up front, we banned surgeries on minors, transgender surgeries, 2 years ago.
Amen.
But our committee starts looking at the budget and we're like, well, why are we spending money on those surgeries then? How does that work? And I'll break it down for you. Here's how it works. The state health benefit plan was sued. They decided to settle a case. The case said that they would pay for that transgender surgery. Well, you look across Georgia and you go, guess what? Nobody here can perform it by law. It's illegal for a doctor here to perform that surgery. So where do you go? You go out of state. So not only then are we using your state taxpayer dollars on a surgery that you didn't think policy-wise we should fund in the first place, you're now funding said surgery you didn't think we should fund out of your state. So we had to introduce legislation. I'm certain that Senator Harbin, that's my bill, Senator Harbin, I'm sure, is on it, Senator Setzler, Senator Dolezal, to say, hey, listen, let's unwind these things, as Senator Dolezal already told you, and take care of the root of the problem, even though we thought we already had.
How does your responsibility relate to the fight for the sanctity of human life?
That fight, thankfully, I stand on the shoulders of folks who began it a long time before me. I mentioned to you Senator Williams. When Sonny Perdue was elected governor, he flipped the state Senate. Senator Williams was a chairman, important chairman, vice chair of appropriations, chair of the Medicaid committee. And I remember watching those guys early on weed out funding that went to destroy lives, to kill babies. So we stand on their shoulders. Much of that work has already been done. You're going to get to hear from Senator Setzler in the back. I'm not going to steal his thunder yet, as he talks about how we're working even further on those issues. And again, it's not a folks say that politics sometimes is a sport. If it's a sport, it's definitely a team sport. Because one, you've got to have your friends like Senator Harbin, like Senator Setzler, like Senator Dolezal there to help you, because you can't pass anything by yourself.
Tomorrow morning on the briefing, I'm going to deal with a question from a listener who questioned why I refer to taxation as confiscatory. And what I'm going to tell him is, try not paying them. You're going to find out what confiscatory means.
It goes back to what we said earlier. The state,
Yeah.
We don't create anything. We use the power of law to take the money out of your pocket and put it in the government's coffers. And to an extent, maybe that's needed. Roads and infrastructure. You go back to the basics of what the Constitution said. The federal government's power was provide for the common defense, coin money. Maybe a few other ones, but definitely not to what we've gotten to now.
So what do you think of the big challenges facing Georgia, say, in the near term?
Greg mentioned the budget, trying to tee me up for being up here, and I appreciate that. I think I think our actual problem is not dollar related. I think we're going to be okay there. I think our my fear is apathy. Folks, you're busy. Our generation that cares is getting older. The folks that are there to pull the wagon, whether it be at the school board or it be at the church board, are fewer and fewer. So we've got to find a way that we work together to be even more efficient, bring more folks in, or we've got to realize that it's going to get even harder and harder as we continue to move forward.
How does Georgia fit in the larger national context?
Important. I mean, I was looking at, in my quiet time, I reading through the Bible. I'm sure y'all do that every year too. I'm in Exodus. When you think about if you think that God was just big picture, read Exodus. He details down to the type of string in the garments that are supposed to be worn. I mean, our God is a detailed God. And I'm off on a segment. I probably
preach it, brother.
Well, I'm getting off your question a little bit. I don't even remember what your question was at this point, Doc.
Where does Georgia fit in the national picture?
Right. Thanks. Look at the Middle East. Look at a map. And why was it so important? Well, it's the crossroads of everyone. Well, then look at the United States. Where does Georgia fit? We're not in the center. But honestly, people aren't crossing the center to get places. They're going north to south. They're going south to west. They're going east to west. I think just looking at that picture, we sit in the middle of the crossroads, the Middle East of the nation. And when you see the battles that are going on now, these battles, the Bible lays this out very clear. We're not battling flesh and blood. There is a spiritual battle. And that battle seems to more and more every day focus on our state. The political battle, you saw how important President Trump said, I do not win without Georgia. The governor understood it's not a secret that they had some bad blood, but they put that aside for the betterment of our country. When we're battling on heartbeat bill, who was the lead state in that? It was Georgia was the lead state in that. And y'all, if you think that was easy, it was not. They held, Senator Harbin will tell you, they held in effigy our funerals in the hallways of the Capitol, our political deaths by voting for that bill. No, we were voting for life. We also have to be certain, though, that we're intellectually consistent in what we argue. If we are going to fight for life from conception, we have to make sure we're wrapping our hands around those families once those kids are here. There are 13,000 young kids tonight in state custody in foster care. Do you know one thing we have more than 13,000 of? Churches. We're not asking every church to adopt a child, but if every church could wrap their hands around a child, and let's be honest, some of you churches can wrap your hands around 2 children. We solve the problem. We are not going to be relevant to the people. Sorry. Maybe the applause gave me a chance to rephrase this, and that's probably good. We are more relevant to people when they realize we are making a difference. That's why you're here. We got to make sure that there's younger hair here next year, because that wagon is not getting any lighter.
I want to push on you just a little bit there.
Is this like with Greg? You said I'm not going to correct you, but
no, I just want to say, but at the same time, it falls largely to the legislature and to the government of the state of Georgia to make sure that the religious liberties and the convictions of Christian churches and parents are not violated.
Yes,
and that's not the price of becoming a foster parent.
You're right. Thank you for bringing that up. My wife and I, we're foster parents, and so that is so real. I know he's in the back, that Senator Setzler, when he speaks, talks about the RFRA bill that has become so controversial in the past. It is not controversial. You've got Senator Schumer's speeches. I guess now I'm a lawyer, I get to preach a little bit more. Yeah. You've got Senator Schumer's speeches, President Clinton's speeches, saying why this is needed, why this is necessary. we need your help to educate your House and Senate leader why it's necessary as well. I think you've got the political appetite in this state right now to take on big business on that issue. You, but they need your support. The legislators who you're calling on need your support behind them to let them know they're okay to vote that way.
I just want to say, if you're going to mention Senator Schumer, I'm also going to say he is Exhibit A of why we must have a Religious Freedom Restoration Act. That cuts both ways. So what do you see as the greatest danger? And I'll make that the final question. What do you see as the greatest danger, and what's the greatest opportunity as you look at the state of Georgia in just the next few years? What is the greatest opportunity? What's the greatest danger?
Again, the greatest danger, I'll tell you, I think is apathy. So few people pulling the boat. Look, our population.
But nobody cares about that.
You're, our population, so let's talk real numbers too. Our population numbers are starting to level off. This is going to be the largest high school class you'll ever see in Georgia history.
Wow.
We're now leveling off, and since we fund education on a per head basis in Georgia, that means education dollars are going to start shrinking in the future. We hold to funding, to formula funding. And that'll get difficult for us at the legislature, but I think we'll hold to that. If you look at the Rust Belt states, this is what you saw them go through in the 90s. So Georgia may be at that point of seeing how do we respond to a finally leveling out of population. You can't just use growth to fund the new things and to continue what you were doing. You got to start make hard choices. I think our answer should be infrastructure, things that matter for investment, get out of the things we don't need to be in. I think Cole mentioned earlier, 53% of our budget's in education, yet only 29% of our kids read on third grade level. Where would you invest if you're a business?
I also want to point out that it is a conservative affirmation that 2 + 2 = 4. Liberals could do different things with math. If we're compelled to deal only honestly with objective truth, we've got to deal a bit more candidly in the numbers. I appreciate the way you've done that tonight. I think that it just shows we're grown-ups and we need to take responsibility. The state of Georgia needs to take responsibility for its fiscal health, because that's a demonstration of what the state of Georgia really believes in and is committed to.
Well, thank y'all, and thank you also for the opportunity to be in here tonight. I want to say one more thing. We do work together. Senator Setzler in the back, this was supposed to be his time. He knows I live 3.5 hours south of here, and I've got 2 kids and a wife who want to see me, a 3-year-old and a 9-month-old. So, Senator, thank you so much for letting me go during your time so that you could go later so that I could go home to my family. It just shows that really remembering that treating people like people, what a good thing, and I appreciate you, Senator.
Please join me in thanking Senator Blake Tillery.
God bless you. Good to see you.